Good morning. Welcome to the Tri-State Dairy Exchange April webinar. Today we will be facilitating a discussion on virtual fencing use in the Northeast with a panel of 3 producers who use the no fence system for all or a portion of the 2024 grazing season. We will hear about what worked well and what didn't, and if these folks plan on integrating the technology into their future grazing management. We'll also get a brief overview of how the technology works from Emma Baker, who is a support advisor for No Fence. We have some great webinar topics coming up over the next couple months. You can join us in May for our conversation with Dr. Romero, a timely one as we head into the cropping season. It's all about hay silage production and management. And in June, we will be joined by the Northeast representatives to learn about consumer trends and how dairy promotion works in our part of the country. And as we'll be wrapping up our local June Dairy Month festivities. If you're here with us live today, you're already registered for these upcoming sessions. But if you're watching this as a recording or would like to share this opportunity with someone you know, you can scan the QR code here for the registration link or visit the UVM Extension Northwest Crops and Soils program website and check out our conferences and events page. And lastly, just a reminder that all of our webinar sessions are recorded and posted to the UVM Extension Northwest Crops and Soils program YouTube channel. The mission of our Tri-State Dairy Extension team is to advance dairy management, address shared industry challenges, and foster innovation through collaborative educational programs across Northern New England. Our team joins you from the University of Maine, University of New Hampshire, and the University of Vermont Extension. Dr. Glenda Pereira is an assistant professor of animal science and dairy specialist at UMaine. Dr. Sarah Allen works as the New Hampshire State Dairy Specialist for UNH. Whitney Hull provides technical assistance to dairy producers across all of Vermont through her role as Extension's Dairy Herd Management Specialist. And I am part of the Northwest Crops and Soils program team in Northern Vermont, working with cow dairy operations that participate in on-farm trials and projects. And I also provide support for grazing operations. It's a busy time of year for everyone as we hope the weather warms up and crops begin to grow. You can stay tuned here for our upcoming extension events in all 3 states. This weekend, you can check out New Hampshire's Farm, Forest, and Garden Expo. You can visit with UVM Extension as they will have a booth there, as well as the Granite State Dairy Promotion. Glenda's out this week, but you can stay up to date with new episodes of the main Farmcast every Wednesday. We'll talk more about that shortly. And in Vermont, the Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Markets has been facilitating a listening tour over the past couple of months with in-person gatherings in every county. There are a few virtual sessions remaining with specific focus groups, including processors, young and beginning farmers, and a general open session. You can scan this QR code to access registration and more information about these events. Also, if you're local or if you're up for a road trip, please mark your calendar and save the date for the UVM Extension Northwest Crops and Soils Program Annual Field Day, this year on Thursday, July 24th. This is a great opportunity to come visit and tour our research farm in Alburgh, Vermont, and learn about the work we're doing. We have thousands of plots to support our research on a variety of crops, including all types of forages, grasses, legumes, corn, and soybeans, as well as small grain production, dry beans, fiber hemp, and new this year, strawberries. We start the day with a guided tour of all the trials and facilitate breakout sessions in the afternoon. We'll keep you posted with updates on our field day here. Also, just wanted to give you a quick heads up that the Vermont Dairy Promotion Council, with assistance from Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Markets, has just recently published the Vermont Dairy Delivers 2024 report. It's packed full of information and stats on how dairy farming is impacting Vermont. You can access the information on their website, vermontdairy.com, and you can download the full report there. We know that as cropping season ramps up, folks will be too busy to sit down in front of their computers. So we wanted to share some of our favorite dairy-related podcasts that you can download and take on the go. Whether you're working with farms and out on the road, or if you're headed out to the field and going to be putting in some tractor time. Starting this month, we'll be featuring a new podcast that we have on our download list so that you can listen on the go. This month is a bit of a teaser for our next month's webinar, as our next month's topic will be recorded for the main Farmcast. But this is a really fantastic resource for any time. The Farmcast is facilitated by Glenda and her team at UMaine, with new episodes released every Wednesday. There are over 50 episodes already recorded and available for download. Recent episodes have focused on milk quality, bale grazing and grazing planning, small-scale dairy nutrition, and solar-powered water systems. You can download past episodes directly from the website or listen in on all of the major podcast platforms. And now we're going to dive into today's conversation. I'm so excited for this topic. Virtual fence systems are relatively new in the Northeast, and there are a number of different brand options on the market. And this is a market that's really evolving and expanding quickly. Today, we're talking with 3 Vermont producers who have had the opportunity to use No Fence brand system on their operations. And we're just going to start with a quick overview of the brand and how technology works with Emma Baker, support advisor for No Fence. Please feel free to drop your questions into the chat or hold them until the end.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Amber. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Bear with me. All right. Perfect. Can everybody see that? Thumbs up? Yes.
You're good. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you all for inviting me here today. My name is Emma Baker, and I'm on the support team at No Fence. So I was just asked to come on and give a very brief overview. And I promise I will keep it brief because I'm excited to hear from our panelists. But to start, No Fence offers both a sheep and goat collar as well as a cattle collar, and they both operate the same way. And they are paired with an app that you can download from the App Store and put it on your phone and or tablet. The collars themselves come with removable, rechargeable batteries, and they also have solar panels on the side of each of the collars to keep them continuously charged throughout the grazing season. On average, the sheep and goat collar, which is the smaller one that you can see on the left, will hold a solar charge or a full charge from anywhere from 2 to 3 months before you would need to swap out that battery. And the cattle collar is on average 9 to 12 months. And of course, these notifications of if a battery is running low will be available to you in the app, and you'll be notified as soon as you need to switch out that dead battery for a fully charged one. All right. And then I also wanted to just briefly touch on the app because I do think it's one of our best features. When you first open up the No Fence app, you'll be greeted with this status screen, which is the screenshot that you see here in the middle. This is where you'd be able to monitor your animals, see where they're at any given moment, and also see which of your active pastures they are in. This menu is also where you can navigate to the other pages in the app, like pastures, collar management, or even the settings. So let's say you wanted to create a pasture, you would move over to this pasture page and a screen would pop up like this, the one on the left, to edit a pasture. To make a pasture in our app, it's as easy as placing your finger on the screen where you would like your fence posts, and the lines will connect to each other to make some shapes. And I've seen some pretty creative shapes out there of how people choose to design their pastures. It's also fairly easy to move those boundaries. So if you would like to edit one of the fence posts you've just made, you just hold on to that fence post or that dot and drag it out to where you want it to go. So that's a pretty great feature. You also are able to make exclusion zones in the app. So if there is an area in the pasture that you want to keep your goats or your cattle from getting to, let's say it's a garden or just something that you just do not want them anywhere near, you can exclude that portion of the pasture and it will operate the same way as if they were approaching the virtual boundary going out of the pasture. And then the last screen I just want to talk about is if you wanted to check on one animal in particular, you can navigate to the collars page of the app, and then a screen like this one would pop up. So I wanted to check on cow number 23 today and just see how many warnings it got or how many pulses. You can also check the battery life on that collar, see if you need to make a swap anytime soon, and also check things like the last time that collar has reported to your phone. So there's many functions here, and we tried to make our app as user-friendly and flexible as possible to accommodate our customers. Okay. Next, let's talk about what happens when your animal is actually approaching that virtual boundary. So you just created the pasture in your app. what is the animal going to experience? So as the goat approaches that virtual boundary line, they are going to hear an audio warning first, which is a series of tones that increase in scale. It's a little melody. It goes a little something like do, 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 do. And if the animal has not returned back into the pasture or turned their head back into the pasture before that last note of that melody is hit, they will receive a shock around the neck through the chains on the collar. The behavior we're trying to get them to learn over time is to associate that audio cue, that melody, with a shock. And so as soon as they're kind of trained to the system, typically they will move their head or return back into the pasture before that melody is completed. And if they do that, they won't get a shock. But let's just say an animal continues to move forward past that boundary. They did receive a shock, but they're still moving forward. They will receive a series of 2 more audio warnings and then pulses before the system is registering that collar as being escaped. As soon as that animal is considered quote unquote escaped, you will get a notification on your phone immediately saying that Bessie has left the pasture. And that is when you can go and check on your animals, see what they're doing, and herd them back home if you need to. Typically, what we say, if it's just one animal that has escaped the pasture, we always just say wait 5 to 10 minutes and see what they do. Herd instinct is really, really strong. And so if the animal goes back into the pasture to be with the rest of the herd who stayed put, they will not get any shocks going back in. So we don't want to punish them for the behavior we want to see. So that often happens with one escaped animal, that they'll return back to the rest of the herd. And as soon as they do that and they're back within those pasture boundaries, the system resets. And if they tried to go back out of the pasture, they would receive that same series of audio warnings and shocks. So that's the very basic overview of it. And then very lastly, I just kind of want to talk about the technology systems that come into play with how our collars operate. So the containment piece that we just talked about, so the positioning of where your animal is, the audio warnings, the electric pulses, that is all run on GPS satellites. So as soon as the collar has the information of where those boundaries are, the GPS satellites kind of keep that animal contained in those boundaries set. Our collars also work with cell connectivity or cell towers. So I like to think of the cell tower as the middleman between your collar and your phone and how they communicate together. So if a caller needs to send an alert to your phone saying that Bessie has escaped, that information goes to a cell tower first and then back to your phone. And if your phone needs to send a message to the caller about pasture changes, boundary, if you're editing a pasture or moving them to a new pasture, that information goes to a cell tower first and then back to your caller. So it is important that you have at least 1 to 2 bars of service in your area and in about 75% of your pastures to work our system. If there are some areas of low connectivity, it's not necessarily a huge problem. Your phone just might not, the collar just might not report as frequently as it would. But as soon as the collar is back in cell connectivity area, it will report back to your phone. The collars do partner with AT&T and T-Mobile. So those are the towers we predominantly use. But if you have Verizon or any other cell phone provider, that does not necessarily mean that you can't use our system. It's just the callers use AT&T and T-Mobile, and your phone can use whatever provider you have. And then lastly, we also have a feature that your phone can communicate with the collars via Bluetooth. So if you are within Bluetooth range, which is about 50, 60 feet, and you need to troubleshoot a collar or remove that collar from a pasture, you can do that way as well. It's a little bit of a fail-safe in case you get into a situation where cell connectivity is low in that area and you need to move that animal out of the pasture. You can do it via Bluetooth connection. So that is also an option. So that's my very brief overview, but I'm happy to take a few questions or hold them to the end if that's what we prefer to do. So I will stop sharing and let our panelists take over.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, if we want to just hold questions till the end, that would be great. That was a super informative overview. All right. And without delay, we will jump right into our panel discussion questions. First, if you just want to give a quick introduction of yourselves and tell us a little bit about your farm. Kristen, would you mind starting us off? Ooh. Do you want to unmute, please?
Thanks. I'm Kristen Doolin, and my husband, George Van Blonder, and I run Doe's Leap Farm in Bakersfield, Vermont. We have been grazing goats for 25 years now and milk about 40 goats and process all of that into cheese or kefir and market all of that ourselves. So yeah, that's us.
Great, and you're located in
Bakersfield, Vermont.
Bakersfield. All right, and Melanie?
Yep, I'm Melanie Harrison. My husband Patrick and I run organic dairy with Jersey cows. We milk 175. We raise about 100 replacement heifers and farm about 450 acres, plus some rented ground. And we ship our milk to Organic Valley.
And you're in Addison.
We're in Addison.
Yeah. So separate, different parts, different ends of the state, kind of. And unfortunately, Sam Dixon from Shelburne Farms is unable to join us today. Shelburne Farms used the small ruminant collars on their sheep herd for part of the 2024 grazing season, and hopefully we can catch up with them at another time. All right. So prior to integrating the virtual fence technology, what has been your approach to grazing management before the no fence collars?
So yeah, we used extensive electric net fencing. We have management intensive grazing that we would have a new paddock after every milking. So we're doing a lot of moving net fence, and our strategy was really to sort of maximize production and keep the goats as happy and eating as much as possible, which can be kind of tricky with goats in general. So we try to incorporate a lot of different things, browse, traditional pasture, browse. Sorry, and yeah, so intensive. We would move, twice a day. We would start grazing usually around May 1st, finish up the end of October. And we have quite a bit of infrastructure right now. We have a lot of 6-strand high tensile, operate with 10 to 12 net fences, running at different times, which was a huge labor investment for sure. And that was what we did prior to this. Yeah.
Super, thanks.
So on our farm, we also practice management intensive grazing. It's more intensive with the milking herd. So they're typically moved after every milking, so twice daily moves. The heifers and the dry cows tend to be slightly less intensive, so 2 or 3 times a week moves with those animals. Single strand polywire fencing with step-in posts is our go-to for break fences to divide up paddocks. And then the farm is fenced with perimeter fences that are high tensile 4-strand. And then we have laneways and water lines to most of the fields so that we can facilitate moves between fields and not necessarily have to allow the animals back to the barn for water.
Why were you drawn to try the no fence system?
We were really excited and been watching for years for this type of technology, pretty much because, as I said, we were trying to cater to the needs of goats that what they really wanted to eat. We've always been trying to incorporate a lot of browse into the goat's diet. They like to be in woodsy areas. They like to be eating leaves and shrubs. We had clear cut some areas of our land and let that sort of regrow. And so we sort of like to mix and match. And the net fencing is just really cumbersome in that type of terrain. You know, dragging a net fence through brambles is not something that, you know, is a pleasant activity. And yeah, and so we were, I think, really well set up to use net fence. I mean, use a no fence system because the way our land is set up. We have always used border collies, which I think is really useful. We use, we move goats back and forth twice a day. And so we have a very effective way to moving goats to all these different areas. And yeah, pretty much wanted to change the net fence system through types of vegetation that is very difficult to do with physical fencing. Did have expectations? Yes. For sure, we didn't really know what to expect. A lot of things were maybe different than I expected, but I think overall, I think that maybe we get into that a little bit later, but I found it to be surprisingly effective and surprisingly easy to train to, and that maybe we definitely have some limitations with the app and with cell service that maybe had to change my expectations a little bit, but we can talk about that later.
So on our farm, we were drawn to it. I guess overall we had been watching a lot of the videos out of New Zealand over the years, where some of the early adopters in this technology for dairy cattle had been present for a while. So we've saw the possibilities that were available through that, and then thought, that could possibly apply to our grazing situations, because we do have a lot of areas that may be more sensitive at certain times of the year, where you may not be able to put animals if it's too wet, or places where fencing can be a little more challenging. So that was one reason. The overall project that we participated in was also cost share funded through the Agritech Institute for Small Farms. So we were able to have a trial run with the collars without having to purchase them up front. So that was really helpful. They reached out to us to see if we were interested in trialing them with some of our heifers on grazing land that we rent, so it's off the farm. So the idea of being able to look at the app and see what the heifers are doing when they're 10 miles away without having to drive over there multiple times a day was appealing to me as well. I guess as far as expectations go, I wasn't entirely sure how I would adapt to using more technology because I didn't even have a smartphone. I just had a landline before this project. So me learning how to use the cell phone and the app was a little bit of a learning curve, but not as steep as I thought it would be. So that part was a little bit easier than I had anticipated. And then as far as, the collar actual use of training the heifers, that went very smoothly. They picked right up on it within about 15 minutes of being in the field and having it activated. So that was helpful. And then overall, I think our experience with it was a little bit tempered because I found some issues with the fit of the collars on our animals, especially with the jerseys having a little bit thinner skin, that they seem to get more like pinching and rub marks from the chains. So I wasn't convinced that design was the best for our animals.
Great, thanks. Sam, I see you're on now. Thanks for joining us. We just got through the third question. Do you want to just take a minute and introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about how you've approached grazing management before using the no fence collars?
Yeah, I apologize to everybody for being late. I just got caught up in some stuff out on the farm. Yeah, my name's Sam Dixon. I'm the farm manager here at Shelburne Farms. We graze dairy cows, sheep, and beef. We've been rotational grazing, I think, since the early 80s. I've been here since 1996. We use a lot of different levels of grazing on the farm. Intensive grazing for the milking cows, moving every 12 hours, all the way to set stocking on some large pastures for dry cows and everything in between. The sheep move about every 1 to 3 days, and that's the species that we use the collar on. And similar to what I heard Melanie talking about, they learned very, very quickly about the collar. I did notice some interesting grazing habits. They seem to be at first very timid about exploring the boundaries of the collar. They tended to stay in one place, and they got very timid about uh, uh, about spreading out and grazing. And I am like Melanie. I'm not technological at all, and I don't have any apps on my phone, and our herdsman really was Renee Lacoste was really the one who monitored the day to day, and her feedback was really good. She really liked being able to uh, monitor the animals and watch how they were grazing, and it really would help her if there was an animal that was off, because you could notice that it wasn't moving around and maybe go out and check. And we used it on 13 ewe lambs that were separate from the ewe flock. Unfortunately, our trial was cut short by coyote attacks. We noticed one night that they were all gone from their pasture that they had been uh, set up in, and they had all been spooked by the coyotes, and the coyotes had killed a couple, and they had run off. So we didn't have a guard dog or anything, so we just cut the trial short, brought them in to the barn, and so our trial was somewhat cut short. Definitely could see the possibilities with the technology, especially for someone who was up to date on using that technology. It seemed to be a revelation for Renee.
Great, thanks. All right. You guys you've all kind of touched a little bit on the training process. If you have anything you'd like to add, or if you could describe the training process both for yourself as a user and the animals, that would be great.
I just wanted to touch a little bit on, because I think a question popped up as well on predators, because in the chat, and I just wanted to mention that we didn't have any problems with the goats, but it is a real concern for sure. And we don't have a livestock guardian dog either, although we have in the past. And the way that we have operated is, our goats are using this during the day. And when I have them in places that I feel are really vulnerable, like in the edge of the woodlots and maybe in browsy areas that I feel is more vulnerable, I actually try to have more of a presence. Like I'm around, I'm paying attention to my app. If animals are stressed or whatever, then I'm going to go get them. And then our animals are close to the barn at night and actually spend the night overnight in the barn. So we have not had any problems, but it is on our mind and it is a concern. And then in terms of the training process, Amber posted this YouTube video that we put for our grant funding on this that sort of went through how we trained. I will say it was infinitely easier than I had expected. And yeah, they figure it out in no time. I was really surprised at how quickly that went. And if you're interested in learning more about how we train, then this video would be something that you could maybe follow up with after the webinar.
I could just say a little bit about our training process here. We were able to watch some of the webinars to kind of learn how to use the app. We set up a visible fence and then set the virtual fence just inside of that so that the animals, when they first started learning how to use the collars, would at least have a little bit of an idea that something's coming before they would just run right through. So that only, training period lasted a couple of days, and the heifers picked it up right away. It was interesting to see there were certain animals in the group that are always the first ones out there to get shocked or to be exploring, and other animals, as soon as they see the first ones getting shocked, they just stop in their tracks and they almost never get shocked. So it's kind of interesting just from a animal behavior standpoint to notice these different personalities in the animals, the ones that are kind of more bold and willing to explore, and the ones that tend to hang back and be a little more timid. But like Sam said, I also had noticed that the animals did tend to group together a lot tighter in their grazing pattern with this system than they would otherwise with just using the regular polywire fence.
So when we were training them, we were aware we hadn't been having. I give a little background. We hadn't been having predator problems on the farm for like 20 years, and it just really popped up in the past 12 months. So we were aware that there was a potential problem with predators. So we had set up a perimeter of FlexiNet, and then we're grazing the sheep within that perimeter. So there was always sort of the physical barrier that they were used to, and then we were subdividing within that. And we were all just I was amazed at how quickly they learned. It really was 20 minutes before they kind of had it figured out. I did notice over time that habit of bunching together and not really exploring, they seem to be over time, even though we only used it for maybe 4 to 6 weeks, over time they were becoming more comfortable with moving to when the bell went off and the buzzer went off and kind of told them you're getting close. And then there were there were animals that were always sort of getting pinged, and then other animals that just didn't range as well. But they were, and in terms of the weight, that was another concern I had, was just putting something around the animals' necks that they weren't used to, that it would freak them out, and they might just like have a problem with something big and heavy around the neck. We didn't really notice that at all. The collars fit easily on them, and they didn't seem to be a big burden for them as they were grazing.
Great. Talk about your grazing season using no fence. We're just wondering if this impacted or how it impacted your day-to-day management and how you use your existing infrastructure. You've talked a little bit about that, but maybe how you foresee your infrastructure needs changing if you're going to continue to use the no fence. And also if you were able to access additional land that you hadn't accessed before for grazing, and talk about how battery life was and how important cell phone service was.
Okay, so this is a big question for sure. And then I'd like to just, as Sam mentioned, with the collars, I think we're the only one that's actually going in and out of a milking parlor with the collars, and that was a concern for us as well. And the goats again adapted to having. At first, they didn't want to run. They having these collars. They were a little bit like, what is it? But they learned they figured out how to move and run, and they definitely get in and out of the parlor head gates without any problem. It doesn't. I was very surprised again that was easy. It actually changed our grazing system pretty dramatically in terms of, again, like where we were able to put animals, land we were able to use easily, and how we grazed. To deal with the sort of clumping or goats didn't clump as much. I mean, I think they're more curious and brave, that they definitely felt their boundaries. But we ended up using larger paddocks than I think we normally would have used, because when we were using net fence, we had them pretty contained. And so we're ending up using larger paddocks and maybe doing some overlap, so they aren't put in a really small space. So that maybe we would tap into yesterday's paddock a little bit to give them more space, and then whatever that's called, like, just leapfrogging or whatever into fresh areas, so they would have more space to move around. Big impact was being able to, a couple of things is, goats are really sensitive to weather. They don't like to be really rained on. They don't like to be out in the sun. They don't like to whatever. And so we were able to move around to different areas of the farm. Also, like, if the grass didn't really look great in one spot of a field, I could pop someplace else and graze, someplace else for a few days and then go back to a field. Whereas that never would have happened for us. If you have all your infrastructure, all those fences, and you're heading down the thing, you're not going to pick up all those fences to go spend 4 days someplace else and hit a field that maybe needed to dry out or something. You just sort of marched on. So that was a positive impact. Also, like on a hot day, I was able to just sort of, if I had a beautiful piece of pasture or something, I was able to maybe just move my fence up into the woods a little bit to give them a lounging area that was cool and comfortable, and they could come out and graze and go and lounge in the woods. Whereas I wouldn't have done that in net fence because it was just sort of a hassle, and or I had to cross a road, which is really hard to, not a real road, but a farm road, which is hard to put your posts into, or so it changed, and then it changed, the areas of land, that browsy land that we just hadn't used in years because it was just such a hassle. And as a result, it was interesting. You had to keep a lot of data for this grant. We had some really interesting improvement in milk production. So interesting to see how this works for this year. But because we started in July, I sort of had I should have posted, that would have been a great picture, but I wasn't on top of it. But because we started in July, I sort of had like an average milk production per goat going along as we were, and my herd average was maybe, 2% higher than it was the year before, going through May and June, just due to herd genetics or whatever. My herd was improving. I had like a 2% increase in milk production. And then July hit, and we started using this fence, and my average herd milk production was like 13% higher for the rest of the summer. So I got a huge bump in milk production that, you have your lactation curve or whatever, but, as we sort of went along, the lactation curve just sort of diverted, and they held their production so well. And I think it was because I was catering to so many, shade and comfort and browse. And so overall, it was very positive for us. The cell service is a huge issue for us. We're very limited on cell service. And we knew going into this that we were really pushing the limitations of what this fencing can do. Both because we have a dairy, we're taking them on and off fence twice a day. And just in case people didn't like totally understand what Emma was saying, is that you load the collars with cell service. You load that perimeter that you set up on your phone, loads onto the collars with cell service. Once it's on the collars, cell service isn't needed. It's the GPS that's going to So once you get it on the collars, you're fine. The animals are not gonna not get shocked or get out or whatever. That's once it's on there, it's great. But it can take hours for us to load our fencing onto the collars. And so what we ended up having to do is we load our fence the night before. And so it all works fine. So you wake up in the morning and all the collars are loaded up where they're going to go for the day. But we cannot use it for nighttime paddocks. We usually we milk and then we get them out for a couple hours in the evening. And we are not able to, bring them in and upload a new fence during that milking time and get them back out. So we have a sort of a hybrid system, and we just have areas around the farm close to the barn that we use net fence in that 2 to 3 hours after milking that they're being fenced, and then they go in the barn, and they only are using the no fence during the day when they're farther out and using this. And then the other thing is, of course, so you're also trying to take them off the pasture with cell service. Ideally, you would say like, oh, I'm going to take them off the pasture, remove them with your cell service, and they would be removed. That doesn't work for us. So we have to go stand in the herd. And we use Bluetooth to remove the goats from the pasture. I mean, the first night we didn't realize this. The first night you go out there, you're like, oh, you're going to go milk your goats, and like, we can't get them home from milking. We couldn't figure out what was going on. It's time to milk, and our goats are stuck out there. I don't know, removing collars. And it was a little bit like, what do we do? We milked an hour late. We didn't troubleshoot ahead of time, but anyway, so now we go out. That's usually fairly straightforward. You just go in the herd. It maybe takes 2 minutes. They all are removed. You can see it on your app. We just started fencing this year. We just started yesterday for the first time. And I did have some problems with the app yesterday where I couldn't, you're just getting the collars warm to figure it out and whatever. I had a couple collars that I ended up taking off. So I just couldn't get them to, So I am very grateful that I have goats that are so friendly and easy to handle that I can just sort of whip collars on and off and whatever. And so I walked a collar across the boundary last night. So there are some shortcomings, unfortunately, due to cell service. But we are just in terms of the economics of the milk production and labor. It's even the hybrid system that we're using. We have considered it very effective for us. And did you want to say
battery life?
Battery life. Okay, so that's the other question that we started in July. We had to change a few batteries out, so we pulled them off at the end of October. A lot of them just stayed charged that entire time. We did have to pull a couple batteries and swap them out. Again, with the dairy, that's just so easy because they're in a stanchion every night, and it's just so easy to be that the app tells you like, oh, Chipmunk has a low battery, you've got to pull her collar, and you see her, she's right there. You can swap the battery right there. We would often pull it off at night because we're not using it anyway, pull it off in the parlor and then change the batteries overnight and put it on in the morning milking. And that was very easy. It'll be interesting to see how they hold up, because the disadvantage of being in a milking parlor is that you're planking around, and I did notice some damage to the solar panels over the course of just the 4 months. They're getting nicked and whatever. So whether that impacts how well they maintain a charge or can recharge with the solar panels, we'll see over the next few years. But again, with the dairy, it's just not that big a deal to pull a few collars off and charge them overnight and put them back on in the morning. If you're dealing with beef cow or sheep or something, that seems like a much more of a handling hassle. But for us, it was not.
I guess I'll jump in here and talk a little bit about my grazing season. We started in May, and so we had 20 heifers on some rented pasture, about 40 acres of mostly grass fields, but there was a small patch of forest in there as well. And we were able to graze the animals through with usually daily moves. Sometimes I would move them a little more frequently, sometimes a little less frequently. But one of the disadvantages of having these animals far from the homestead here is that I still have to drive over there every day or every other day to check the waters and look at the animals and make sure that, you know, the grass is growing where I think it's growing, rather than just, you know, pop in once a week and make sure everything's okay. So the overall time savings for me wasn't as big as I thought it would be, because most of the fencing that I would have otherwise done there is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of hazards to fence around or brush or that sort of thing. And most of the fields, you know, are kind of rectangular shaped. So the one advantage I did find was when it was really hot in the summer, I could manage where they went, as I would let them into parts of the wooded area. And so at times there were areas that were kind of wet and more prone to damage. So we could exclude them from those areas and keep them on drier parts in the shade. There's also a pond on that area that we were able to successfully exclude them from, even though it was only permanently fenced on 3 sides. So that was helpful. Battery life was not as expected for us, and I wonder if that's just because we were using fairly small paddocks and frequent moves, and that was drawing a lot of charge from the batteries, as well as not having great cell service there. So if they're kind of spotty and they're trying to communicate and they can't, and then they're potentially using more battery up, trying to communicate with the cell towers when they can't. So we grazed through from kind of the middle of May through to the beginning of August, and most of the collars were starting to get to the point at that time where they were going to need to have their battery swapped out. And since these were heifers that were on grazing off of some rented ground, we didn't have any good handling facilities there. We had to physically take gates over to make a corral to try and catch them if we needed to swap out a battery. So we had 1 or 2 collars that kind of were chronic problem collars that kept having issues kind of right from the beginning. And we sort of just like ignored those for a while because they just seemed to stay with the rest of the heifers anyway. And then once all of the batteries were starting to get worn down, and then we knew that it was time to bring them home, because there was not an easy way to kind of catch them all and go through and swap out the batteries right on pasture. It worked out okay. We probably brought them home maybe 2 weeks earlier than we would have otherwise, because most of them were due to start calving in September. So that was one challenge. Overall, the weight of the collars on their necks, I think they seem to cause a little bit of swelling underneath their chins, where the unit would kind of hang and bob into their underside of their head. And we had rub marks from the chains where it was kind of irritating the hair and irritating the skin there. So overall, I think the design of the collars was not perfect for our type of animals. I think they probably, if they had maybe the solar panels towards the top of the animal's neck, maybe they would have charged better, rather than being down underneath their chin, and when they're all kind of standing in a clump, they're kind of shading each other's collars. So those were a couple of kind of observations that we had during our trial period. I guess what else was I supposed to talk about here?
Cell service in your area? You have pretty
Cell
decent service?
Spotty. It's
Okay.
definitely spotty. We were I basically would try to just move a forward fence forward on them and leave it overlap with their previous paddock so that I didn't have to keep too close to tabs on, you know, how quickly they were uploading. It was just whenever it got around to it, it would upload and I wasn't excluding some animals from the old area before all of them had uploaded.
Great, thanks. Sam?
Well, we had that shortened season because of the predator problem. So we didn't, uh, uh, you know, it's been really interesting hearing how in depth you can use these things, because we never we didn't have the time to really dive into it that way. I will say the what Melanie said about, you know, some of the batteries were sketchy. Maybe you want to have a couple extra batteries, definitely, around. And then the whole issue of cell service, even though Shelburne Farms is, you know, 10 miles from Burlington, we still have, within a given pasture, you can have bad service in one corner and good service on another. So that to me is a real, going to be a real challenge with this technology is the cell service. But in terms of how, like I mentioned before, in terms of the ability to see what animals are doing, was a real revelation for Renee to be able to look on her cell phone and, well, you know, this animal hasn't moved, or, you know, this animal is getting pinged, or it was really quite a lot of information.
Great. I'm gonna skip this question. I feel like we've been covering the strengths and weaknesses right along, and I'm gonna kind of combine a couple questions into one last question, so we have a couple minutes for questions from the audience. Do you feel that this system is cost prohibitive or more economical when compared to your existing grazing infrastructure if you were in the position where you had to buy the system outright? With this cash flow for your business? And do you plan on using the no fence system for the 2025 grazing season?
We are planning on using it, and we fortunately got grant funding to cover the cost. We get a DBIC grant in addition to working with Agritech Institute. We're 25 years into this thing, and we have so much fencing infrastructure at this stage that I wonder if you would have really bit the bullet to do that when we're sort of looking at the last 8 to 10 years of grazing or whatever. But having miles and miles of 6-strand high tensile and all this net fencing, I mean, it's not cheap. And our energizer is $4,000, and the grounding fields and the hassle with fencing repairs and new net fences, etc. So as a startup or something, I think I guess you have to play around with some infrastructure. It has some perimeter fencing as well, but we have a lot of internal sort of perimeter to try to limit the labor that we had. So I mean, considering it'll be interesting to see how our bump in milk production is, but seeing as that we have a value added product where our milk is very, very it's worth quite a bit. And so yes, and from the data we have so far is that it definitely paid for itself in labor and productivity. So yeah.
Great, thanks.
So for our operation, it seems like it's cost prohibitive if we were to buy this outright, compared to just the existing system that we have been using. Overall, I think the labor savings was not as much as I thought it would be. I appreciated the peace of mind of being able to look at the app and, before I go to bed at night, make sure the heifers are all doing what they're supposed to do. But I don't know that it's worth the cost for us on our operation, particularly because we are in a little more of a volatile milk market. So we need to prioritize spending money on things that are going to create a higher, faster return, or are more necessary. Whereas this technology, I feel like it's not quite at the level that I would want to make that investment at this time. I think there's other opportunities for it coming, and down the road, I think it will probably get cheaper and become more widespread, and some of the kind of the kinks will be worked out. And as far as like the design and making it easier for the batteries to maintain a charge longer in the season, and address the rubbing issues on the cows' necks and all those sorts of little things. I think there's other designs that can be looked at as well. And I overall like the idea of it, but it's just this particular system, and at the cost point where it is now, doesn't really make sense for our operation. So we are not planning on using it again this year. But it doesn't mean that we will never use it again. It's just where we're at right now in our operation. So since we're on a kind of a bulk milk contract, and that can be a little bit more volatile, and the margins can be a lot slimmer. So.
Excuse me. I mean, I had always had concerns about using this, and we work with the agri-tech people, and so our costs of using it were not very, didn't affect us this year, but I was always skeptical of using it with sheep because of the predator problems. And I don't know whether you could put a collar on a guardian dog or not. We can't have guardian dogs at Shelburne Farms just because we have so much foot traffic that we just can't have those animals on the farm. There are too many visitors. I think that, like Kristen was saying, if you're starting out on some rented land and you don't want to make investments in somebody else's land that you could lose, it might make sense. We have about 100 acres of pasture right on the other side of the road that we use, and I basically just kick 20 to 25 heifers or beef cows out there and move them every month. And they seem to do great. But whether we could use the virtual fence on that side and run more animals and get better performance, I think that would be a great application for it. And we're in a different economic environment than a lot of other farms because we can try different things, and we have a value added product, and we do education and agro-tourism. So we have a sort of a different financial framework than many other farms. So from a strictly cost benefit, it probably would be closer to what Melanie was talking about, whether it's actually worth it. But I think it could make sense in certain applications, and I'd be very interested in trying it with heifers. I think it's much more suited to cattle than it is to sheep. If you're going to have a sheep operation, you're going to need 1,000 sheep, right? And you're not going to have 1,000 of these things on the sheep. So that's pretty much my perspective on it.
Great, thanks. We're in the interest of time, we're going to skip to just a couple questions that are in the chat so we can wrap up within the next 5 minutes or so here. Emma, maybe this is a question for you. Is no fence considering a solution for guardian dogs?
Yeah, so right now we only offer collars for sheep and goats and cattle. Those are the animals that we have tested them on and we know it works for. But it is something that we've been getting a lot of feedback about from different customers around the area. So never say never, but at the moment, no, we do not have anything for livestock guardian dogs.
Okay. And Emma, could you cover just the costs of the no fence system, the collars and whatever subscription charges there are?
Yeah. I should have prepared a slide for this, but the cattle collar is $289 each, and then the sheep and goat collar is $199. There is a subscription fee that is tied into both of those. And for your first year, the subscription fee, regardless of if it's a cattle collar or a sheep and goat collar, is $56 per animal. And that covers the whole first year. In year 2, it can switch to a monthly plan and you'll only be charged for the months you graze the collars. So if you're not intending to graze all 12 months out of the year, that can be a cheaper option to kind of just go month by month.
And is there a minimum or maximum herd size for these systems?
Yes, our minimum order is 5 collars. So we don't have a max, and our maximum, we don't necessarily have a maximum at the moment, but our minimum is 5. And that is mostly because we've realized if you have a herd smaller than 5 animals, they don't learn the system as quick as possible because it really does rely on this herd mentality that all of the animals have. So a smaller herd size is just not always as functional.
Perfect. Kristen, thanks for answering some questions in the chat there. And we will wrap up here. I just wanted to let you guys know, again, remind you that next month you can join us for the main FarmCast crossover event discussion with Dr. Juan Romero and the science of hay harvest for maximizing yield and quality. You can learn about all the tips and tricks for successful harvest and all the factors that contribute to hay crop silage in your bunk with high feed quality and value. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you have a minute to scan this QR code and take our survey, we'd really appreciate it. We're going to email it out to you anyway, so you can do it ahead of time. And actually, Shannon, if you want to drop it in the chat, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, everybody have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much, Kristen, Melanie, and Sam. I really